I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of your first word news. Some new developments in the tariffs proposed by the Trump administration. The White House says Mexico, Canada, and other countries may be exempt from the president's proposed steel and aluminum tariffs under national security carve-outs. The exemptions would be on a case-by-case and country-by-country basis. Attorney General Jeff Sessions informed law enforcement officers in Sacramento today that the DOJ sued California because state laws are preventing federal immigration agents from doing their jobs. He spoke as protests went on outside. California Governor Jerry Brown accused Sessions of trying to appease President Trump and divide the country. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos visited Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida today, where 17 people were killed in that mass shooting. Secretary DeVos called the visit sobering and inspiring. She also said arming some teachers should be considered an option, but not a requirement. A nor'easter is tearing across the East Coast for the second time in less than a week. The storm has grounded nearly 3,000 flights and could cut power to millions who just had their service restored after the earlier storm. More than a foot of snow is expected in some parts of the Northeast. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti, and this is Bloomberg.
And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, tech loses an ally after Gary Cohn exits the White House. What the loss of the president's top economic advisor means for the looming trade war with China and to Silicon Valley. Plus, Bitcoin whiplash. The virtual currency dives again, this time after renewed scrutiny from the SEC. We'll have a cryptocurrency update live from London. And BlackBerry may have given up on smartphones, but not the technology that forged its reputation. We'll weigh in on the messaging war about to go down with Facebook. First, to our lead. Markets around the globe, already rattled by signs of rising inflation, had a dramatic reaction as the threat of a trade war looms. This after the departure of President Trump's top economic advisor, Gary Cohn, on Tuesday. Here to tell us how things shook out in the markets, we are joined by our Bloomberg News stock reporter, Abigail Doolittle in New York. So, Abigail, walk us through the day.
It was a very exciting day, Emily, and it actually takes us to about this time yesterday, considering the resignation of Gary Cohn came around this time, and at that time the S&P 500 futures dived at the lows, down about 1.5%. And on the open today, big losses. The Dow was down more than 1%, and then we came off of those lows a little bit, but then back down. The Dow down at the lows, down 1.4%. The S&P 500 almost down 1%, but at no time did the NASDAQ lag quite as much. And in fact, mid-morning, Emily, the NASDAQ climbed higher. And then on the close, the NASDAQ up 0.3%. So another day of intraday volatility. We've been seeing these whipsaws for the last couple of days. It really speaks to uncertainty. Investors not quite sure what is going to come of these potential tariffs or a trade war. What will it mean? The reason that the Dow and the S&P 500 are down more than the NASDAQ, some of those industrial stocks are being hit on the possibility of tariffs and higher aluminum and steel input costs. But plus, we have strength for some of the classic tech names, such as Facebook, Microsoft, along with Alphabet. And then there's also Autodesk. Today, Autodesk rose, had its best day of the year, really surging up 15% after the software and tools company put up a stronger than expected quarter. They also had a very good recurring revenue guide. But relative to some of those other tech names, investors really flocking towards some of the big tech names, high quality, being bid up today, suggesting that even though there was a sense of risk off early on, that investors were looking to buy the dip, so to speak.
In fact, it was almost exactly 24 hours ago that Gary Cohn resigned, because we broke the news right here on Bloomberg Technology. Abigail, this is the third day of volatility in a row with so many whipsaws. How can investors gauge risk?
Well, that's a great question, because earlier today, while the major averages were down sharply, if you went cross asset class, it wasn't being confirmed. Bonds were rallying just a little bit, but the quote unquote VIX index up not so much, and the yen was about flat. also. So if the risk-off sense were to be confirmed from across asset class, we would have saw a big rally in bonds, a big rally in the haven yen. The VIX would have been soaring. Perhaps even gold, a quasi-haven asset, would have been higher. But we didn't see any of that. That tells us that some of the smart early money, that they weren't seeking that haven play, which in turn suggests that they were, again, looking to perhaps buy the dip, that these news whiplashes that we're seeing aren't perhaps as dangerous, so to speak, as something beneath the market internal. So it'll be interesting to see how all of the recent volatility, consolidation, and congestion plays out, Emily. But right now, lots of volatility. Stay tuned.
All right, Abigail Doolittle, our stocks reporter in New York. Thanks for breaking it all down. Now, with Cohn departing the White House, the thought of President Trump imposing his desired trade tariffs is sending chills throughout the tech community, especially if those tariffs take aim at Chinese imports that include consumer electronics. Amazon and Apple could feel the pinch, especially considering that the products they manufacture are manufactured in China, and Apple may have the most to lose, with most iPhones, iPads, and more being made there. Here to tell us more about what a looming trade war could mean for the industry at large, Bloomberg Tech's executive editor Tom Giles and Max Abelson, who covers money and power for Bloomberg. So, Max, I want to start with you. You know, the U.S. could impose these tariffs on a broad range of products, everything from shoes to clothes to iPhones. Is Wall Street panicking?
Wall Street is not happy. I mean, look, on the one hand, we can't go too far. I think the reality is that no one knows what's going on with this White House. And so I think that, you don't see the stock market losing, 10%. But people are upset because Gary Cohn, remember, he was the president of Goldman Sachs. He left being the number 2 guy at Goldman for the White House. And that came after Trump literally mocked Goldman Sachs on the campaign trail. So people were relieved that they had this guy who they saw as sort of a friend, someone who understood them, someone who could push to cut their taxes and cut corporate taxes. And now Gary Cohn is gone, and that's sort of destabilizing. I talked to Wall Street executives over the last 24 hours who sort of said, like, this freaks me out. Someone compared it to losing a security blanket.
Tom, let's look at Apple as an example, because it's still unclear if Apple would be marked as an importer, if this would really hit the companies that manufacture Apple products like Foxconn or Honhai. What does this really mean as far as we know for Apple, its products, its supply chain?
Right. So Apple has to be caught in the middle of this somehow, given the fact they're the world's largest, most valuable company. They are importing products from China, both finished goods, and a lot of their supply chain is in China. So to the extent that China's affected, Apple's not going to get off scot-free here. The question is, in a worst-case scenario, we've talked to a few analysts here, it certainly would be affected, but at a company that generates so many tens of billions of dollars a year, we've heard people talk about this as something more of a rounding error. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars. Not, at the end of the day, a big factor. It really all depends on how much of a levy is going to be imposed on steel, aluminum, finished goods. Trade wars aren't good for big multinational companies like Apple and to some degree Amazon, although Amazon and some of these other tech companies, the FANGs that people like to talk about, are less affected because they're so service-based. Microsoft, a software provider, Facebook, social media delivered over the internet. Amazon, the lion's share of what it does is not consumer electronics, although the echo is getting bigger and bigger.
Apple in particular, we know President Trump took aim at the company on the campaign trail. Tim Cook has since met with President Trump at the White House a couple of times, so who knows where that relationship stands. Max, is there a silver lining here?
There might be a silver lining for Wall Street, considering that Steven Mnuchin is the Treasury Secretary. That guy worked for Goldman Sachs just like Gary Cohn. But, to be honest, when I hear Tom talk about Apple, and I'm reminded that Trump mocked Apple, considering that directionally no one, as you say, knows what's happening, if Donald Trump decides that he needs someone to beat up on, I feel like I've been hearing strains where it might not be Wall Street. Like, what if it's big tech? I feel like the guy who made the movie about Clinton Cash, I think his name is Scherzer, something like that. His next documentary, which is going to debut at Cannes, but not during the Real Film Festival, I think it's about the big tech companies. And I can sort of smell in the air, the sense that Trump, maybe the new Wall Street, the new sort of punching bag, might, instead of being Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, it could be, Amazon and Apple.
Marty Shaker was on the show yesterday during the breaking news, and he talked about how he thinks that the relationship between Silicon Valley and the White House, Tom, has taken a bit of a pause because we just don't know. What is the sort of general vibe or response from the tech community so far about these tariffs in particular?
So what you have to think about with Silicon Valley is, to the extent that we are going to look at foreign nations as kind of the enemy, that's going to have a big impact. There's lots of different ways. And I think the biggest way that I want to talk about is when you look at the big deal, the biggest deal in tech, which we broke here at Bloomberg, Broadcom trying to buy Qualcomm. This is a transaction that is hitting a buzzsaw at CFIUS, the Committee for Foreign Investment in the U.S. They're looking at this, and what they're saying is, to the extent that this transaction would undermine our competitiveness as a country vis-a-vis countries like China, CFIUS doesn't want to see it happen. Treasury is raising objections. We wrote about the letter that they published earlier this week that says we don't want to see this transaction go through. On one hand, that sounds friendly to tech companies. On the other hand, if you're Broadcom, you don't want to see a big deal like this, a big game-changing deal, get blocked. So how much are the companies, our big tech companies, going to get caught in this larger narrative of U.S. competitiveness and U.S. competitiveness with countries like China?
And what does it mean for companies like Xiaomi that have been trying to crack the U.S. market, but they are coming with products from China?
It's not going to get easier. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to sell phones, tablets, laptops, it's not going to get any easier for you to get a toehold in the U.S. under a regime like this.
Now, Max, you talked to a lot of people about what Gary Cohn might do next. You got some interesting answers. Any inkling as to what he will do next, and also who will fill his role?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the truth about someone like Gary Cohn is it's sort of like trying to figure out the White House. Gary Cohn spent 25 years as a Goldman Sachs versus a trader and then by Lloyd Blankfein's side, and then he went straight to the White House. I mean, the truth of the matter is, the way the world is going, it's not that insane to think he could go back to Goldman Sachs, especially because Dina Powell just announced that she's returning. I think she's going to the management committee. I mean, it would be a bad look for the revolving door, the idea that, people can leave Goldman Sachs, go accrue political power, and then turn that right back into a Goldman Sachs job. I think there's some expectation from people around him that he could have a Main Street job. Actually, absurdly enough, someone said that he could work for SpaceX, but it looks like they've got wonderful management, including one of the biggest women in tech. But I mean, there's also a chance someone said Gary Cohn should just go spend 6 months on the beach in the Bahamas, and I feel like of all the options, that one probably seems like the most realistic.
I love that idea for him. What about who would fill his job, and how important is it that that's another banker?
It's just so crazy to think about. I mean, Donald Trump, if you were pressed and someone was twisting your arm and you had to, say, what does Donald Trump stand for? I'm pretty sure you would sort of say, populism, this idea of the Stephen Bannon cooked up idea of populism, that Donald Trump sort of represents the average person. It's just so remarkable to think that he is a billionaire who has surrounded himself with billionaires. I mean, Bloomberg News has done a really good job of explaining how his cabinet is the richest cabinet in the history of America. So, I mean, on the one hand, I feel like it would be crazy to guess that he's going to pick anybody but another tycoon, someone like Wilbur Ross or Stephen Mnuchin. I can almost sort of imagine him moving someone who's already there to take Gary's job, shuffling around. People I talked to said it's hard to imagine people leaving from Wall Street to go to the White House, considering how chaotic things are there. I mean, it doesn't exactly seem like a place you go and stay for a while.
Absolutely. All right. Bloomberg's Max Abelson and Tom Giles, thank you both so much for joining us. We'll be watching to see how the revolving door revolves. Okay. Meantime, Amazon is reportedly offering a discount on its Prime membership to the millions of Medicaid recipients in the United States. The move is another step to lower income shoppers and keeping pressure on Walmart. Under the offer, customers on Medicaid can get Amazon Prime for $5.99 a month, about half the usual cost. Coming up, Bitcoin plunges after the SEC says crypto platforms must be registered. More on current crypto regulatory concerns next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. A story we continue to watch. Twitter is trying to stop alleged cryptocurrency scams on its platform. The company says it is taking steps to prevent these kinds of accounts from engaging with others in a deceptive manner. Facebook recently banned ads tied to cryptocurrency. Sticking with cryptos, Bitcoin sank after the Securities and Exchange Commission said cryptocurrency platforms need to register as exchanges. The SEC statement raising concerns that tighter regulations could limit trading. Bitcoin has dramatically dropped since its December high as regulators have clamped down on crypto transactions and investing. Joining us now to uncover more of the crypto space, Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde, live with us from London. So, Caroline, a lot of different things happening today. In particular, walk us through the main thing that you see driving the price down.
Yeah, there seem to be a couple of points of contention here today. One is regulation, the other is potential hacks. Now, I draw your attention to really what happened to the price of Bitcoin today. I'm going to get into a Bloomberg terminal. You can do it at home if you have one. Type in #BTV and then plug in the numbers 5031. You see, we're back down at $10,000. We're back below that pink line that is the 50-day moving average. That means, well, we could go lower. And key to this is the SEC continuing to cast its beady eyes on crypto assets. They think that some of them aren't so-called utility tokens. They aren't like Bitcoin. They're not a commodity. They think some of these hundreds of thousands of new tokens that are coming to the fore are in fact securities, and they should be regulated as such. And if you are an online platform that helps with the buying and selling of these tokens, then if they're securities, you need to be regulated as well. Now, we already know that some of the big players, big platforms, so-called exchanges, are regulated to a certain extent. You've got Coinbase's GDAX. Now, they are regulated by the money transaction licenses that they have in many different states. You've also got the likes of Gemini, which calls itself a trust, and therefore it's regulated by the New York State Department of Financial Services. But actually, some other exchanges are trying to be regulated. They want to be SEC approved because they think that some of these new tokens will eventually be classed as securities. They want to lure in the bigger money, the likes of the institutional funds. So look at the likes of Templum and Overstock. They're both looking to be SEC compliant. But that's one of the reasons we saw the Bitcoin sell-off. The other reason is, rather ironically, about an exchange. This one is called Binance. The rumours were swirling that this Asian-based exchange, Emily, was potentially hacked itself today. Money being pulled out of wallets, being put into another altcoin called Viacom. Now, we understand that Binance have come out to Bloomberg and said, look, the funds are safe. But still, that really did push down that price point. And I draw you to another overall look at how the money is swirling into Bitcoin, because if you type in #BTV 5021, you'll see that really the pressure continues to mount on the institutional side of things because bearish bets are out there. We are starting to see shorts gather pace. We are double the amount of short contracts than we are long contracts, Emily.
So talk to us a little bit about the manipulation, cryptocurrency manipulation that platforms like Twitter are trying to avoid.
Exactly what you were talking about before you came to me. The fact that Twitter, like other social platforms, is finding itself being manipulated, being the place that phishing scams are occurring. Now, you know what a phishing scam is. You might get a weird text to your phone. That was the odd email that you click on a link that you shouldn't do. Now, social media platforms are finding this is rife within the crypto world. How? Well, on Twitter in particular, what you're seeing is verified accounts, those little blue ticks that both you and I are lucky enough to have on our Twitter accounts. Well, they're managing to hack verified accounts, these phishers, rename them, make them look identical to other actually legitimate crypto projects, and then start sending out the too good to be true offers, really luring people in to therefore send their Ether, send their Bitcoin to them. And then, of course, suddenly they vanish. So this is what Twitter's seeing. Jack Dorsey, just the other day, February 26th, said, look, we're fixing it. He then came out yesterday and said, I'm on it. And they say they're on it. They set out this statement saying they know that there's manipulation. They know that they're going to try and prevent these types of accounts from engaging with others in a deceptive manner. But we also know that these fixes don't always work. Facebook has clamped down on ads. Still, some of those ads are getting through. Can Twitter get these hacked, verified accounts reputable again?
Talk to to us a little bit about what's happening at Facebook because, Mark Zuckerberg was, initially in favor of cryptocurrency. Then they've banned these ads, though some ads, as you say, are still making their way onto the platform. What kind of manipulation or, strange activity is Facebook worried about?
I think exactly the same. Phishing for and false advertising for cryptocurrencies that aren't actually cryptocurrencies or what they seem to be. And this is why actually what we're talking about is so circular, because this is why the SEC and regulators are weighing in. They know that when you have an exciting area such as this, that you are going to get misbehavior in it. And we are going to get the excitement of those wanting to get into the latest crypto platform, into the latest crypto asset. Well, they'll act too quickly. They'll click on a link that they shouldn't do, and they'll be taken advantage of. So Facebook, Twitter are finding themselves attacked by phishing, and therefore we're seeing regulators wanting to get these securities deemed securities and start to regulate the exchanges as well.
All right. Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde for us live from London. Caroline, thanks for breaking it all down. Coming up, Broadcom is working to salvage its massive deal to buy Qualcomm. What is the company doing in response to concern the tie-up could hurt innovation and threaten national security? And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Broadcom is responding to government concerns about its proposed takeover of Qualcomm. The company plans to create a $1.5 billion fund to secure America's lead in future wireless technology. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. is threatening to derail the Qualcomm deal, saying it could hurt competitiveness and threaten national security. A longtime Netflix bull cut his rating on the stock to hold from buy. Stifel's Scott Devitt held a buy rating for more than 3 years, but said the company may have sprinted ahead of fundamentals in the short term. Devitt added he remains attracted to Netflix's business in the long term and expects the company to beat forecasts for subscriber gains this year. Netflix stock is up more than 60% since the beginning of 2018. Meantime, Amazon says it is aware of a bug in its Alexa feature and working on a fix. The problem? Some users say they've heard strange laughing noises at random from Echo home speakers. The company didn't say when it would be fixed, but Amazon can push updates to the voice service automatically. Coming up, it was the phone with the keyboard that defined the smartphone messaging era in its infancy, but now the BlackBerry is largely an afterthought, and the company is taking to court to bring in revenue. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of your first word news. UK Prime Minister Theresa May and opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn clashed over Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's visit to the country in Parliament today.
As she makes her arms sales pitch, will she also call on the Crown Prince to halt the shocking abuse of human rights in Saudi Arabia?
First of all, can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for telling me that it is International Women's Day tomorrow. I think that's what's called mansplaining.
British police say a Russian former spy and his daughter were targeted and poisoned with a nerve agent. Both are in critical condition, and the case is now being treated as an attempted murder. An officer who helped them out when they collapsed is in serious condition as well. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has arrived in Ethiopia at the start of a 6-day tour of Africa. He is the most senior U.S. official to visit the continent since President Trump took office more than a year ago. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg. Just after 5:30 p.m. here in Washington, 6:30 now Thursday morning in Hong Kong, where we are joined by Bloomberg's David Ingles with a look at the markets. So, David, set it up for us. What are we looking at today?
We're likely looking at, I would say, a moderate bid. across equity markets as we get underway this Thursday. But let me just get started. Maybe some good news here. There's some news right now, and let me just get the latest lines here. Out of the North Korea here, and this comes from the Chosun Ilbo news agency, that the North is essentially looking at a conditional halting of its ICBM program. That's all the details we have so far. We'll continue to follow that story, but that line just dropping about 2 minutes back, so we'll see whether or not that plays out in the markets today. I'm looking at dollar-yen at the moment, which is obviously a first reflection of whether or not we are getting a bid or an offer when it comes to safe haven. It's not really. Overall, we're getting a weak dollar as we head into this Thursday. As I mentioned, equities are bid. We have GDP coming out of Japan, and also some trade numbers out of Australia and China. So really fitting, given the sort of news we've seen so far over the last 12 hours or so. So I'll leave it there for now. I'm David Ingles here in Hong Kong. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Well, if you owned a smartphone for work in the mid-2000s, chances are you had one of these, a Crackberry. At the time, it was the king of mobile messaging devices. The BlackBerry, aka Crackberry, was ubiquitous. But then came the wave of iPhones, Samsung Galaxies, and messaging platforms like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. And with their arrival, BlackBerry sales plummeted. And now, in an effort to stop the bleeding, BlackBerry is suing Facebook, saying that it basically invented modern messaging, claiming that Facebook is ripping off its inventions like notification icons and more. Here to delve deeper into this suit, Bloomberg Intelligence's Matt Larson, who covers tech litigation, and also with us Sarah Fryer, of course, who covers Facebook. So, Sarah, what led up to this?
So BlackBerry, as a company, has been focusing a little bit more on trying to get revenue from IP as opposed to its messaging business, which, as you note, has declined. Its handset business, which, as you note, has declined. Patent revenue is on the up and up, and maybe they have a chance here with Facebook, which certainly has money.
So do they have a case, Matt?
They do. BlackBerry has over 40,000 patents. They have a very broad patent portfolio. They've been active in this space for a long time. One of the patents at issue here was filed in 2003, so we're looking at pre-smartphone era IP. Some of this is foundational. The question is just, what's the incremental value of that, 15 years later? They're likely seeking pretty high royalties, and so, the question is, how much is this actually worth to a company like Facebook that continues to innovate and put out new products with direct messaging services?
Why now, though? I mean, this has been going on for years.
Yeah, as Sarah mentioned, BlackBerry's business model has changed. They've gotten out of handsets, and they're looking more at brand licensing, software licensing, and IP licensing. So they have this huge portfolio of patents. They're looking to extract some value from that. They've gone after companies in other industries. They just settled a big case with Avaya. They settled a dispute with Blue, one of the handset makers. And so Facebook kind of represents this other industry segment that they're looking to reach in and try to extract value from IP.
Could this materially hurt Facebook?
I mean, Facebook at this point has looked at this lawsuit and basically said, this is a desperate attempt by BlackBerry to wring some money out of these inventions that they haven't been able to turn into what we've been able to turn them into. So no, we don't think we owe them any money. Facebook in the past, when it has been accused of copycatting, like with Snapchat, we've seen it many times. They have said, listen, in the world of software, we kind of, as a technology industry, settle on the right way to do things. Gmail wasn't the first mail app. Google wasn't the first search engine. Facebook certainly wasn't the first social network. Matt, question for you. When you look at that kind of copycatting, like what Facebook has done to Snap, and the arguments they're making there, what is different between that and the kind of intellectual property stuff they're arguing about here?
Yeah, that BlackBerry is trying to assert. I think when you see the copycatting these days, when somebody sees a new product come out and everybody kind of rushes to build their own version of it, you're using techniques and knowledge that's widespread in the industry. You can put some engineers in a room and have them come up with a messaging app. BlackBerry's point is we wouldn't live in this world if 15 years ago we hadn't started developing the baseline for these types of applications. Software, tech, and Silicon Valley generally tend to be a little bit less pro-patent than some of the hardware and hardware services companies. So you're just kind of seeing a fundamental disagreement as to where the value in these types of properties lie and what the best way to innovate is.
How much money potentially are we talking about here? I mean, how profitable, if you will, have the prior settlements been, and how much could they shake out of Facebook, essentially?
Yeah, so BlackBerry's patent licensing revenues have grown about threefold over the last year or so. They reported around 50 million this past quarter. And this is a product. The way BlackBerry filed the suit is they're looking to get into the ad revenue that's supported in part by these messenger products. Facebook has fat gross margins, around 86%. So, an appropriate settlement might be in the tens of millions per quarter. That'd be a very high end.
How long? Forever?
Patent licensing revenues are typically calculated on licenses over 2 to 5 year periods. So, 2-year period, anywhere from a couple million to maybe top end 10 million a quarter.
Sarah, what is the actual timeline here? When do we see the next move?
Well, I think that what we've seen with lawsuits in Facebook in the past, sometimes they fight it to the death, sometimes they settle. In the case of the shareholder lawsuit against Facebook last year for Zuckerberg's voting rights, they settled that at the very last minute, just days before Zuckerberg was set to testify. They pulled their plans. So, we could see them fight, or we could also see them come to some sort of agreement behind the scenes. You really never know. BlackBerry and Facebook are certainly talking now. Maybe if Facebook was ignoring them in the past about their questions about whether they could get paid, now they're certainly paying attention, so things can move faster.
All right. Bloomberg, Sarah Frier, and Matt Larson, thank you so much. I know you will keep us posted. All right, sticking with Facebook, we are still waiting to hear whether Mark Zuckerberg's plan to revamp Facebook's algorithm has led to more, quote, meaningful conversations. One thing we have learned is that its ad costs seem to be rising as a result. That's according to a new report by AdStage. The change was meant to lead to less time spent on Facebook, and ad impressions on the site are decreasing from previous years, meaning that the cost of 1,000 ad impressions were up by 122 and 77% for the first 2 months of this year. Coming up, we kick off our coverage of International Women's Day, how Jack Dorsey's Square is leading the charge with a more diverse team. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Silicon Valley takes pride in its progressive views on things like climate change, same-sex marriage, and other cultural issues. But when it comes to diversity, progress in tech has been slow. This month, we are focusing on the bright spots, though, for women across the industry with the kickoff of Women's History Month. On March 8th, we celebrate International Women's Day, a day we embrace women throughout history across the globe and here in Silicon Valley. In doing so, I spoke with Jackie Reeses, Square Capital lead, and Aaron Archuleta, Square's small business education lead, to talk about their journey to Jack Dorsey's payment company. Take a listen.
I started at Goldman Sachs when it was a small private partnership, and I learned 3 things that I have taken with me for my entire life: teamwork, professionalism, and mentorship. And those are issues that have come with me on the journey of building a company, helping to make your peers and colleagues successful, and they really have had an impact in the way that I think about growing my own career. Mentorship, for example, I had 4 mentors at Goldman Sachs who have stayed with me throughout my entire career, even for Square, where one of them was called on as a reference by one of our directors. And so it's wonderful to be able to draw on people who make such an impact on your career as mentors, as friends, and as people who push you to be better than you think you can be.
Square has an incredible bench of female executives with real power. And Erin, you are also one of them, small business education lead. You know, and your story is also fascinating in that you co-founded a sushi restaurant before you joined Square. How does a sushi restaurateur, you know, start running small businesses at Square?
Sure. So I had a background in small business, believe it or not, even more non sequitur in the nonprofit space with a blended retail model. And I learned about how much small business meant to communities, having a safe place, a place where people could come, a third place, and convene, and what an asset it was for neighborhoods. So that really spurred me and my husband Tim to open our own restaurant, to create that hub. And it was part of what attracted me to Square as a Square seller. So I knew that I could really contribute and be a part of things there.
What does a small business education lead do?
So I collaborate with small business advisory groups around the country, folks like the Small Business Administration, the U.S. Chamber, and I work with small business owners all across America.
Jackie, you run Square Capital and you're also Chief People Officer, you know, in an industry that is starved of women. You know, what are you doing at Square to build diverse teams and to create an inclusive environment?
I think the most important thing we started with is inclusion. So how do people feel once they're at Square? And can we create an environment that makes people feel comfortable and then also helps them thrive? And so we focused a lot on making sure that we are helping the careers of women and underrepresented minorities, either by pushing them into roles that we think help elevate their career, making sure that we have some mentorship for folks that need it, making sure we have teams that pull together groups of underrepresented folks so that they could build a community and community groups amongst themselves. And so we've spent a lot of the last year increasing the number of communities we have, as well as elevating their profile within Square. And so we've tried to make it just a wonderful place to work.
What do you think it is about Square or about Jack Dorsey that has enabled, you know, so many women leaders, at least, to thrive there?
Part of what attracted me to Square was the number of women leaders there were. And when I came in as a Square small business owner just to chat about the product and how it worked in my own life, I felt that I had a home there. So just seeing that modeling, feeling like there are groups that I can participate in, helps, I think, foster more women to feel included.
Is diversity something that you're trying to educate sellers about and small businesses about?
So hiring from your community is essential, and so including that in the conversation, absolutely. Also thinking about other places where there are skilled workers. That's an issue that comes up often, is the challenge of finding a skilled labor force. So helping people identify in their own backyard where that exists.
So, Jackie, give us an update on Square Capital. I know you've been testing consumer loans. Any update on when you'll be offering loans more broadly?
Sure. So we've now achieved over $2.5 billion of loans facilitated by Square Capital. So we're super proud of that. We do have a consumer product, which is our installments product. It shows up on invoices. And you could see us evolve that product over time, both across geographies, because we're not in 50 states today, but also across the breadth of other products that Square offers.
Square has sort of become a Bitcoin play, you know, after you guys said you would focus on building an app that would accept Bitcoin. Do you think that Bitcoin will become, or cryptocurrency in general, will become a big part of the business?
So Square Cash has evolved over the past few years to be an incredibly successful and separate vector of growth for Square. It's targeted towards consumer, starting with the network effects of the first peer-to-peer product, and then evolved since then to add a debit card, a virtual card, ATM access, and now cryptocurrency. I think where we see demand for people who want to buy and sell cryptocurrency, and it enables them to access a financial market that they otherwise wouldn't have access to, we see it as a huge opportunity. But I think it will evolve as the overall cryptocurrency market evolves through mainstream America.
That was Square Capital lead Jackie Reeses and Erin Archuleta, Square's small business education lead. And this Thursday, we have an incredible lineup of guests for International Women's Day. Catch our conversations with Ellen Pao, Uber's Megan Joyce, Alphabet's CEO of Google Cloud, Diane Green, and so much more. Coming up, we will hear from the co-founders of Eventbrite on the importance of inclusion, female leadership, changing tech culture, and how they are growing the Eventbrite business. This is Bloomberg. In today's funding board, augmented reality startup Magic Leap announced that it's raised $461 million from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's sovereign investment arm. The public investment fund contributed $400 million, with new investors fronting the rest, the company said. Magic Leap has raised more than $2.3 billion in funding to date without having yet released a product. In this week's edition of Bloomberg Studio 1.0, Julia and Kevin Hart, the co-founders of Eventbrite, also husband and wife. For nearly a decade, Kevin served as CEO. He's now a partner at Founders Fund. And in 2016, he passed the baton to Julia. We began our conversation with how Julia tackled the role of CEO as the business continues to rack up billions of dollars in ticket sales.
I put my head down and focused on what we needed to do as a business. This has been a tremendous growth period for Eventbrite, and I had to get to work. And so I sort of let all of that fall away, and I just focused on building the right team for the future, on executing, on really making sure that the culture, which is global, right? We have Brightlings all over the world, that everyone understood that we were going to be okay. Because I think these big moments of transition can be unnerving. It can create uncertainty, even if there's nothing wrong. And so I needed them to know that I was aware of that and that we were all in this together. And then as you take the helm, like when I felt the difference of being CEO, that made me really respect some of the founder CEOs that I know in the women that I've watched grow their companies. It's sort of like when you have your first baby and then you go back to work and you have immense respect for the women who have children and work. I felt the same way about taking the reins as CEO.
The company Eventbrite actually is pretty solid when it comes to gender diversity. Mm-hmm. I'm curious to hear from both of you how you did that.
We are actually still almost 50-50. Despite, we have acquired some companies that have different gender ratios. We have always been focused on trying to build a company that looks like our community. And our community of creators is global, right? So diversity has to be embedded in what we do. So me being a female CEO certainly provides a great embedded role model at Eventbrite. But inclusion is entirely a choice. Mm-hmm. And you can have great diversity and really not great inclusion.
I think that just as a company needs a competitive advantage, whether it's a technology or advantage or a network-based business, there's a recruiting advantage that needs to be built. And all the great companies have come up with very specific recruiting advantages, whether it was like Microsoft recruiting from young students out of college in the 80s. We saw this, unfortunate bro culture here in this very competitive San Francisco environment, and we saw all this talent available. So for us, hiring moms and looking broader than people that look just like ourselves was a competitive advantage.
So how did you do that?
There's this stereotype of the 20-something male engineer, and you have these incredibly talented women in the Bay Area that have maybe had children, and they maybe unconsciously get written off. And we saw that as our competitive advantage.
The maternity leave is a great time to recruit someone, by the way, because you have this moment of reflection, and there is a varying degree of which companies decide to support people who are going through such an important milestone. And don't even get me started on this. This is a great subject for me to pontificate on. So it's very curious to me that especially in the U.S. corporate culture, we basically penalize people for procreating. Which
pregnancy is a medical condition.
It's a disability. Despite anybody's, broad religious beliefs, like I'm pretty sure we're supposed to be, right, procreating on some level as humans. And so that I think is curious. When you look at it and you say, okay, this is not only a moment where somebody's going through a major life transition, and this is for men and women, but they're also fearful of what their life is going to look like. Are their careers going to go off track? Are their peers going to think about them differently? Are they not going to be able to juggle, or as I like to say, put the jigsaw puzzle together? There's always a piece missing under the couch, right? Of just life, of balancing kids and career. And so all of our sort of, policies around that are great. But it's really about how we treat each other. It's about how we show up for each other. And so part of that, I think, is identifying that really talented candidates, especially in competitive markets, may be reflecting on what their experience is at their own company, right, during that leave period.
Some of my conversation there with Julia and Kevin Hartz, co-founders of Eventbrite. You could catch our full conversation with them tonight on Bloomberg Studio 1.0. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder, we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.